Welcome to First Byte, our Detroit Lions preview podcast. It is week 2 Seattle Seahawks edition of First Byte. My name is Jeremy Reisman. I'm the producer over at prideofdetroit.com. You can find me at Detroit Online. With me as always for this preview podcast is senior editor of Pride of Detroit / Rock God / Ryan_POD on Twitter. Ryan Matthews is here. How we doing, Ryan?
I love all the titles. Thanks for keeping it consistent. I am really excited for what is essentially Revenge Week, right, Jeremy?
Yes. In fact, if you were a POD Direct subscriber, you know how much I do not like this next opponent. But I will say I do very much like this week's guest.
Good to differentiate there. Nice save, Jeremy.
He is the producer over at our friends at Field Goals. He is at Mookie at Mookie Alexander on Twitter /X. Mookie Alexander is here. Mookie, welcome back, buddy.
It's great to be back, Jeremy and Ryan. I'm very much looking forward to pretty much every other game except ours this week. Chiefs Jaguars looks fun. I mean, Dolphins Patriots, that should be awesome. Our game. Very, very different story. Different feeling.
Mookie, I feel like you did this last time you were on the show. I feel like you did this last year where you're like, oh, woe is me. The Seahawks are going to suck. And then they come out and win a 48-45 game, which was mostly pretty fun. I'm not going to let you do that. I'm not going to let you raise our hopes again, only for the Lions to lose a 6th straight game against the Seahawks.
That is true. I mean, the last time was the 2012 game. I think it was Russell's rookie season.
Yeah,
and Stafford just he dominated the Legion of Boom, prime Legion of Boom. I remember Titus Young having the game of his life.
Oh wow,
against Seattle. So
you remember more about Titus Young than most Lions fans at this point.
Oh yeah, when it comes to like random receivers having career days against the Seahawks, it's like it's a comedic memory.
Fair enough. Well, we're going to dig into this year's game, and it's an interesting one because it almost feels like it was the teams are almost in a similar spot in terms of where they were last year, where the Seahawks, again, I think they were 1-2 last year going into the game. The Lions were obviously 0-3, but there was some optimism with how they were playing.
Whoa, Jeremy. What? Lions won a game. They beat the Commanders.
You're right. They were, yes. That's right. They were 1-2. Both teams 1-2 in that game. Mm-hmm. I know Lions were just coming off that Vikings game where it's like it was a letdown game, but you felt pretty good about how they were playing.
They should have been 2-1.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's jump into Seahawks offense versus Lions defense, and I think we have to start like we did last week with some of the guys that aren't going to be playing in this game. Looks like the Seahawks are going to be missing their starting left and right tackle. They're signing guys off their retirement beds to help them out. So, Mookie, how big of a deal is it that they're missing both offensive tackles to start this one?
Yeah, pretty much worst case scenario with the way that Rams game went. It's like if they had lost but no injuries were had, then we go, yeah, that's an annoyance. Tired of losing to the Rams that way. But at least everybody's healthy and back for next week. Instead, Charles Cross and Abe Lucas, those are the two very good rookie tackles from the 2022 class. And now Cross is week to week with a toe injury. Thursday practice hasn't concluded yet, so I doubt that he's practicing today. He didn't practice on Wednesday, so if he's not practicing today, almost nailed on he's not playing Sunday. Abe Lucas won't be practicing or doing anything for a while because they placed him in IR with a known knee issue that he's had, maybe dating back to college, but it's something that the organization's been aware of. Now, I think he only missed one game last year, but knee soreness, whenever Pete Carroll says something on the optimistic side, just add several weeks to it and assume it's the worst case scenario. So he's on injured reserve. So that means he's going to miss not just the next 4 weeks, he's going to miss the first game after the bye week. So he's gone for a while. The replacements, Stone Forsythe at left tackle, he wasn't very good, but he was somehow better than Jake Curran, who was an unmitigated disaster. He played 11 pass blocking snaps and gave up 4 pressures and a sack. So it was rotten to watch Curran play. And that's kind of the issue with the Seahawks offensive line is as good as the starting lineup looks, which I haven't said too much about the Seahawks starting O-line in a long time. The depth is really not there at either tackle spot, which is why Jason Peters rolled out of bed. He was about to apply for Social Security, and there he goes. He's going to get a call up. He might even start this weekend. And from what I recall, Peters wasn't too bad doing emergency duty for Dallas last year when Tyron Smith went down with his torn hamstring. But ultimately, it's a major loss to the Seahawks offensive line because the interior of the O line is still the question mark, whereas the tackles you felt more comfortable with. And now that both of them are gone for Lucas, it's at least a month, but for Cross, an indeterminate amount of time, it's really going to hamper this offense in just the worst ways imaginable. And look, we know that injuries are going to happen to any team. That's why kind of all these preseason predictions are silly. But to have it happen to two of your absolute most important players on offense who aren't the skill position guys, it's a real hammer blow to the Seahawks.
Yeah. Hey, Mookie, the water's warm. You can get in with, us and the rest of the league in terms of tackle depth. You know what I mean? Like after your starters, it all falls off a cliff, man. So it's tough though. Like you said, I think those guys are so critical to what the Seahawks are able to do up front. So can you tell me, like watching last week's game against the Rams, how much different did their offense look? And what were they trying to do with those guys who were clearly limited at tackle in Curran and Forsyth? Like, what did their offense look like after those guys went down, Cross and Lucas?
Well, what happened in the second half? Lucas went out of the game at the end of the first half, so he didn't come out to start the second half, and Seattle went 3-and-out. Cross got injured, I believe, on the first possession of the second half, and the only first down that they picked up after halftime was on a pass interference penalty. Everything else was immediate punt, and they finished with 12 yards of offense. And 9 of those came on the last play of the game when it was just handing it to Zach Charbonnet, who Michigan fans should know very well. Zach Charbonnet got 9 yards on the final play of the game. That was just to run the clock out because the game was over. So that was their worst showing in terms of yards in a half since the infamous 1979 game against the Rams, in which they had -7 yards for the entire game. So not even the 1992 Seahawks, which are widely regarded as the worst offense in NFL history, or at least passing offense, not even they were as bad as Seattle was in the second half against the Rams. And a lot of it was because of the tackles. Just the pressures that they gave up were too easy. They went away from the running game, essentially. So they could never get into a rhythm. It was a horrible combination of the defense was allowing these long drives. So the offense had to make the most of their limited possessions, and instead they made the absolute least of it. So Curran was just really bad. And then Forsyth, he's been a reserve for a reason. They drafted him in the 6th round, but I don't think he's really quick enough to deal with the speedier edge rushers. And outside Aaron Donald, it's not like that Rams defense is just loaded with pass rushers the way they were in previous seasons, whether it's Robert Quinn or Leonard Floyd or Chris Long, et cetera. I mean, that's a pretty tame defensive line. You got like Byron Young and Ernest Jones from linebacker was a pretty effective guy, but they just couldn't cope. They couldn't pass protect on a consistent basis after halftime. So I think the results spoke for themselves as far as what the Seahawks offense looks like, admittedly on an emergency basis, but what it looks like when you have backup tackles going up against first stringers on the Rams side.
Well, you just mentioned it there. It was an emergency situation. They obviously didn't have a full week to prepare knowing that their offensive tackles were going to get hurt. Now they do. Is there at least a little bit of confidence that maybe they come out with a little bit more spark, or they come out with a game plan to, mitigate some of the disasters that might happen at offensive tackle? Because this offense has a lot of weapons, and it seems like there's a way to figure it out, knowing 7 days in advance that you're not going to have your starting offensive tackles.
Yeah, that should provide some solace that they're going to be practicing with the first team as opposed to when Cross and Lucas would be there. So you've got that extra week to prepare. Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, and Pete Carroll and Andy Dickerson, the offensive line coach, they would figure out how can we best protect 2 potential liabilities. And I'll add Peters in there that's a possible third, because the odds of him being ready to come in off semi-retirement and just ball out right away and look like his prime Hall of Fame self, they're pretty remote. So you can work your way around an offensive line missing some key starters. And the Seahawks should know very well about this history, because Russell Okung, for the life of him, could never stay healthy in Seattle. Neither could Max Unger, the center, right before they traded him for Jimmy Graham to New Orleans. And of course, Unger was a beacon of health in New Orleans. Even in the Super Bowl season, they had the most expensive offensive line in the league. And we hardly saw them together because Okung was hurt. J.R. Sweezy was hurt, Unger was hurt, James Carpenter was hurt. They were running so many different offensive line combinations. And as a result, yes, the offense struggled badly at times. Russell Wilson got sacked a ton, even more than he usually does. But it's something that Pete Carroll should be familiar with as how to make the most out of a very difficult situation. So maybe more play action bootlegs, maybe more getting Geno out of the pocket, more quick throws, get the ball out in 2 seconds or less. If it's just an obvious straight drop back situation where you're asking Curran and Forsythe or Curran and Peters or whomever to block like they're crossing Lucas, it's a disaster waiting to happen. So I think that some adjustments can be made, and they're probably not going to leave Curran and Forsythe on an island. In other words, we're going to have more running backs in pass protection, more of the tight ends chipping, whether it's Noah Fant or Kobe Parkinson or Will Dissly. It's not impossible. It just looks bleak because we know the Seahawks history with their starting offensive line often has had troubles over the years. So when the backups come in, everybody is just sweating bullets.
So Mookie, in terms of the Seahawks and their identity on offense, right? And I know it's going to obviously, to your point that you're making, right? It might look a little bit different with some different offensive tackles in there. Is their identity still they want to run the football? Like, is that what the Seahawks want to do? I mean, they keep on spending early day 2 picks on running backs, so that has to be the case, right?
Oh, you really want to get into a conversation about using draft capital on running backs, huh?
No.
We'll save that for a little later when we're talking about the Lions offense.
Sure.
Yes, they still want to run the ball, but they don't necessarily want to be run first. Because last year with Geno, the expectation was, all right, Russell Wilson's gone. Pete has won the war. So that means we're going to see the Seahawks revert to an offense that would look something straight out of black and white television. But instead, they were one of the more pass-heavy teams on neutral downs. So they trusted Geno to sling the rock around. Against the Rams, I think part of the reason they went away from Kenneth Walker was the fact that they just kept going 3 and out because they only had 3 meaningful possessions in the second half. And they ran Walker on first down in the first possession. They ran Walker on back-to-back plays, I believe, on the second possession. And then that was literally the extent of his involvement after halftime. I think he had a catch for -1 yard. But they couldn't run the ball in the second half, largely because they barely had time with the ball. In the first half, they were running it reasonably well. Kenneth Walker was able to either stay patient and follow his blockers or make something creative and bounce to the outside because the Rams weren't setting the edge particularly well. So they had some success there. They just couldn't sustain it. What was interesting to me, and I'll shout out my field goals colleague Tyler Olson, is that even on potential running downs, they were still throwing it. So 3rd and 1 on the opening drive, they went straight drop back and completed a pass to Tyler Lockett. Next 3rd down is a 3rd and 2. Again, an area, and was a part of the field where if you didn't get it, you could go for it. Again, a straight drop back, I believe an empty backfield. And it was a completion to DK Metcalf for 20-something yards. But those were their only 3rd down conversions of the game. And the running game just disappeared along with the entirety of the offense in the second half. If they can possess the ball longer, I think they're going to try and run it more against Detroit. Not because of any potential weakness in the Lions' run defense, but to protect Geno Smith, essentially, because he's going to be pressured a lot, and he was pressured a ton, I believe, on 47% of his dropbacks, which was one of the highest in the league. The only reason it wasn't the highest is because everybody watched the Cowboys-Giants game on Sunday night.
Did we, Mookie? I think we turned it off at a certain point.
I mean, we watched it. I know nobody ever said we watched it through. It's just we saw it minutes, and we knew the rest of the story. But
that's right.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that Seahawks passing game outside of maybe the pressures that the Lions might regenerate against Geno Smith. Obviously, one of the most feared, I would say, group of receivers. But let's talk about the new guys. Let's talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba. Seemed like he had a limited role in week 1. Is he essentially the slot guy, and are we just going to see him in a limited role, or is it a Jahmyr Gibbs situation where it's like, let's ease him in week 1, then we're going to increase his role?
And is he healthy?
Yes, that's the important point. Is I felt like they eased him into the lineup because of his injury and subsequent surgery. So it was impressive that he even made it to week 1 because the Dallas Cowboys preseason game, so the second week of preseason, he had a long catch and run off a play action shot from Drew Lock. And then if you watch very closely, the way he falls, his left hand hits the turf pretty hard, snaps back, and you can tell he's favoring it a little bit as he goes to the sideline. And then he doesn't get another snap, and he probably wouldn't have because it's preseason. But it turns out there was a minor fracture in his wrist bone. So he needed surgery, and the fear was that he would miss opening day, if not a couple more weeks. And instead, he didn't miss a practice. He was there right away. And yet he still has protective wear, and he only had 3 catches. One was on a crossing route that set up Seattle's only touchdown, and it was one of those throws where that's why they drafted Smith-Njigba. Target in the slot, can get to the middle of the field and get some yards after catch. But his other 2 catches were 1 yard apiece. And it was kind of like when Percy Harvin was here and Darrell Bevel seemingly only had like 4 plays for him, and everything was just horizontal. And he also had a drop, but I think it wasn't a great pass, and the other bit was that risk. So giving it more time, I think Smith-Njigba is going to be an important part of this offense, because he can take at least a defender away from doubling Metcalf or doubling Lockett. Now, in this particular game, just hardly anybody was getting open. Looking at the all-22, the route combinations I felt were a problem. The middle of the field was very often not exploited. And on the defensive side, they were getting exploited like crazy. But dudes were just being locked down by the Rams, almost as if to say that Raheem Morris, the Rams defensive coordinator, knew what Seattle was going to run. So there have to be some adjustments there. But we know at their very best, the Seahawks have got one of the best receiving duos in the league. I won't say the best receiving trio because Smith-Njigba has only played 1 game. But from what we've seen in preseason from Smith-Njigba and through the training camp highlights, which everybody loves to overreact to, Smith-Njigba can really mesh well with Geno, and also be that key third receiver that the Seahawks have lacked over the years, including in the back end of the Russell Wilson years, where my philosophy is the top receiving groups in the league, your third best receiver is good enough to be in a pinch a second receiver or even a number 1 receiver. You got that ceiling to be a wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. Look at the Bengals. Tyler Boyd was once their number 1 receiver.
Right. Now
there are 2 other guys in Chase and Higgins who are better than him. He's their third option. But for Seattle, we've had Jerron Brown, we've had David Moore, we've had a very faded Brandon Marshall, didn't even last the season. Marquise Goodwin was all right last year, but again, his ceiling at this stage is pretty much wide receiver 3. The hope with Smith-Njigba is he's the number 3 option right now. He's going to be that slot guy, but a few years down the line, he could very well be the number 1 receiving option, or at least 1A and 1B with Metcalf as Tyler Lockett reaches the twilight of his career.
Jeremy, I just want to shout out Darrell Bevel. He usurped the awful leader that we will not name, but shout out Darrell Bevel.
Shout out Darrell Bevel. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to flip the script here. We're going to talk about the Lions offense versus the Seahawks defense, which to me is a much more fun conversation. So we'll get to that when we come back here on First Byte.
What's going on, guys? Miko here from Pride of Detroit. Thanks for taking the time to check out this clip from our most recent POD live stream. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see where the conversation went from here, all you have to do is click the link in the description that'll take you over to our Twitch channel. And once you're on our Twitch channel, be sure to drop us a follow or subscribe if you're so inclined. That way you can be notified anytime we go live and be a part of our live audience, which means that you may be privy to content that doesn't always make it onto the audio version of the podcast or even onto YouTube. Also, if you're more inclined and you prefer an audio version of our live streams, you can click the links to both Spotify or Apple Music, which will take you to their platform, and you can download the entire audio version of the podcast and listen to it whenever you want to. Again, we appreciate you guys and thank you for the support. Be sure to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to this channel if you're new, and we will be sure to keep bringing you amazing Lions content.